Launching in 2001 and backed by a company that had just come off a string of god-awful operating systems, Microsoft's foray into the console market felt like it came out of nowhere, especially when the titanic force of Sega were closing their doors and Sony was steaming ahead with the all-conquering PS2. Still, they trundled forward with one very shiny gem in their crown, named Halo Combat Evolved. Come the 360, and it was Microsoft's time to shine. People seemingly saw the better graphics and processor kick the original console had demonstrated in abundance, and with Sony dropping the ball on both their overpriced PS3 and the fact they couldn't fulfill any leftover sale demands at the time, it was easy pickings for Microsoft to welcome bedraggled gamers with open arms. Right now, the competition between their newest machines is fierce, and Sony's early sales lead forced Microsoft to provide even better discounted deals and monthly freebies. But they still didn't get into this high-profile dogfight very easily. In fact, there are a number of places where it all could have turned out completely different. Just for fun and pure bragging rights, give yourself a score of 0 and add a point if you already know one of the following facts. This is 16 mind-blowing things you didn't know about Xbox. Number 16, Sonic almost fronted the entire Xbox launch. Apparently, following Sega's disastrous reception of the Dreamcast and their change from being hardware manufacturers to software-only programmers, Microsoft was set to acquire Sonic and have him front their foray into the industry back in 2001. The whole thing went south because Bill Gates didn't have enough faith that Sega were big enough to tackle the Sony of the early 2000s, so instead they decided to do it themselves. Gaming history would have been quite the reworked beast if an entire generation of kids thought of Sonic as an Xbox mascot. Number 15, it takes at least 3 million presses per button to wear out an Xbox One controller. According to Microsoft's testers, the regimen behind this is to mechanically push each individual button 4 to 5 times a second in the factory, leading to 2 million hits overall. However, since the console has been out, Microsoft have done subsequent testing and concluded that their new controllers can last up to 3 million pushes and more, also stating this should last about a decade. That should get the likes of the hardcore Destiny fans through Bungie's entire 10-year DLC sequel plan. Number 14, it was originally called the DirectX Xbox. Have you heard of DirectX technology? Microsoft's flagship 3D rendering tech was one of the first of its kind, allowing users of many different spec PCs to all play the same games, albeit with a variety of differences when it came to frame rates, rendering, etc. Being proud of this and with the general fervour around the software at fever pitch, the DirectX Xbox was set to capitalise on it until their marketing department got stuck in and shortened things down. Now you know exactly where all those misspellings of the name come from when people insist on calling it the X-box. Ugh. Number 13, there were 35 discarded names before Xbox was even settled on. So DirectX was tossed aside at the very end of production, but along the way, Microsoft's PR team tested a huge array of short anagram-like names with various focus groups. The core team actually hated the name Xbox, but it continually won outright with all the feedback teams every single time. Some of the best of the worst that were rejected were Mind, Microsoft Interactive Network Device, E2, Extreme Experience, Face, Full Action Center, O2, Optimal Ozone/Optical Odyssey, R&R, Reality and Revolution, MTG, Microsoft Total Gaming, and AIO, the all-in-one, which they pretty much went back to when you think about the Xbox One. Number 12, the original Xbox was pitched to Sony as a partnership. Like how Sony themselves tried to do a PlayStation/NES hybrid back in the day until they couldn't agree on how to split the disc/cartridge sales at retail with Nintendo, Bill Gates was also in talks with Sony CEO Nobuyuki Ide, only for the latter to reject the use of Microsoft's new tech in the already feature-complete PS2. Bill Gates reportedly took this quite personally, and seeing the PS2 as a major threat to PC gaming and the future of the medium overall, invested heavily in the Xbox, pretty much as a retaliatory strike. Number 11, its iconic central green orb was meant to represent nuclear power. Nothing says power like a ruddy, great, big nuclear explosion. Such was the thought process behind the giant green orb at the center of the original Xbox's design. That notion of a nuclear-powered machine positively fizzing with energy and potential. You can get more of a feel for this on the original Xbox's boot-up animation as the small green orb pulsates and bursts into life every time. Number 10, it would take 485 billion 360s to reach the sun. Now, it might have been Microsoft's fully connected machine that really put the company on the console map, but a pretty random statistic is about its reduced size, being that at around 12.15 inches long, you'd need 485 billion of them stacked end on end to reach the sun. After all, they had to do something with all those red ring consoles. Number 9, Xbox One controllers cost $100 million to develop. It's pretty crazy when you think about it. The new Xbox One controllers cost such a huge amount of research to put together, yet they're not that different from the 360 pad when taken at face value. That $100 million actually went into refining everything in a minimalist fashion, from the analog stick rubber to minor changes in the controller's shape, the sensitivity of triggers, gyroscope accuracy, and the loss of the backpack overall. To be honest, we totally have settled for another 360 pad just with better battery life. Number 8, the Duke controller was only replaced for Japanese markets. Remember the original gigantic Xbox controllers? Although people complained in their droves about its gargantuan form factor suitably only being preferable to basketball players and people with hands like shovels, The Controller S, as it became known, was brought in to try and ingratiate the Xbox into the Japanese console market. As dual analog stick shooters weren't a familiar or marketable entity over there, the thought process was to provide a smaller controller that was easier to literally get to grips with. However, as Microsoft barely had a foothold in Japan in the first place, it still barely impacted sales. Number 7. Microsoft once sued student site Microsoft.com. Except it wasn't a company. It was a 17-year-old Canadian high school attendee, Mike Rowe, who was just trying to get himself established online. As an apology, Microsoft eventually offered him a console and some games as recompense after it went to trial, and he gratefully accepted. To this day, Microsoft.com still redirects to Microsoft.com. Number 6. 54% of all 360s got the red ring of death. Remember the RROD? Although the 360 was a mighty fine piece of kit overall, a whopping 54% of all launch window consoles ended up self-destructing with the dreaded red ring of death, caused by some of the internal components frying themselves simply through general use. People tried everything from reheating the machine with hairdryers to wrapping it in towels, or all sorts of elaborate combinations of holding different buttons and turning it on and off. But in the end, Microsoft just had to reissue brand new, fixed consoles to every single one affected. Number 5. Resident Evil 4 was almost an Xbox exclusive. Did you think the whole "our games art" debate was something born out of the current decade? Think again, as that exact question was at the heart of a meeting between Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami and the representatives of Xbox co-creator Kevin Backus. The story goes that because the latter's team was securing Resident Evil 4 for the Xbox, just because Shinji and his team only spoke Japanese, everything had to go through a translator. When Mikami probed Backus' team for their musings on what games meant in terms of artistic expression, they couldn't adequately get their thoughts across, even though Backus himself very much believed in gaming as something far more than just entertainment. Thus, Mikami ended up signing a deal with Nintendo, resulting in Resident Evil 4 appearing first on the GameCube, after feeling disillusioned with both Microsoft and Sony at the time. Number 4. The Kinect sensor can measure light to 10 billionths of a second. It's just a pity the microphone isn't as technically impressive, and you'll be left waving like a lunatic just to try and get some basic recognition, and that's even if the lighting conditions in your house are spot on anyway. On paper, the technology for Microsoft to dominate the living room was very impressive and there to be used. It just completely fell apart in the marketing and the execution. Number 3. The original shape was a literal Xbox. Could you see this sitting underneath your TV? It just looks like some sleeping transformer assessing the house for weaknesses before springing forth in the middle of the night and making off with the toaster. Luckily, Bill Gates and his concept team decided against this hideous design and added a more full look, birthing the iconic one we know and love to this day. Number 2. The Kinect technology almost went to Apple. Created by Israeli company PrimeSense, the fancy Kinect tech was first offered to Apple, who didn't want any part of investing in something so unproven. But Microsoft, seeing the potential for a new foray into digital entertainment, snapped it up. Assumedly loving the idea so much, they staked the whole of the Xbox One's launch day presentation on it just a few years later. And we all know how that went down. Number 1. The original Xbox lost Microsoft $4 billion in its first 4 years. Due to the relatively poor sales in comparison to the PS2, especially in Japan, and the fact the internal hardware required to make the original Xbox was so pricey, each unit lost Microsoft $125 at retail, being it cost them around $425 to make, but was just being sold for $299. Over time, this stacked up to a whopping $4 billion across 2001 to 2005 alone. I guess you've got to spend money to make money? So that's our list. How many did you already know? Show off your scores in the comments below. You can find us on social media here, and here. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll see you soon.